The Feast of Christ the King is rather an interesting feast because it's a very recent addition to the calendar of the church. It was actually a feast that was instituted in 1925 by Pope Pius XI. Pius spent most of his life as Vatican librarian before becoming Pope in 1921. But he had lived through the tumultuous times and seen the results of many things happening in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. In the 1800s, the Vatican States, which was a country, of course, were overthrown, and the Italian government made the Vatican simply a small little part of the state of Italy. At the time, too, we see World War I had occurred. We see the rise of communism, the rise of fascism in Italy. Hitler was starting to rise up in Germany. Japan was gaining power in the Far East. And Pius had this concept that Christ was the ruler of every country. In fact, he would say he was like emperor of the world. And part of his mission was to regain a place for the church, and he did so, finally negotiating with Mussolini, and we know that the Lateran Treaty finally was signed in 1929 to make Vatican City an independent nation again, albeit one of the smallest in the world. But that aside, the gospel is very relevant, and we know from the gospel, today's gospel and the gospel of Christ's passion, that Christ said his kingdom really was not in this world. Christ was not concerned about government and politics of a particular nation. He was concerned about people. He was concerned about those who were hungry, those who need clothing. He was concerned about the poor and about everyone in their ability to know and love God, to know and love each other, to raise a family, and to live out a peaceful life. Government was not his concern. Sure, he was king, but his kingdom was of another world, and that is what this parable today in the gospel, the last of the parables, is Christ's kingdom coming to us. And he presents it that right away he separates the goats and the sheep. The goats were seen as kind of a negative, bad type of animal, and sheep were good as far as that particular time of Christ looked at them. But to me, the scariest thing of all that he says about feeding the hungry, having concern for the poor, is when he says, what you do for the least of my brothers, you do for me. I find that scary because how often do we ignore people, ignore our surroundings, and don't see the need of people and persons that we come in contact with. It's great to say we send out money to give to the poor in Africa, to the poor in Asia, to the poor wherever there is hunger, there is famine, there is need. But do we actually see the need in our own neighborhood? Do we see the need when we go out shopping and walk past a person who has a sign that says, I'm hungry? Sure, some of those people might be a scam, but not all of them are. Some people are so desperate that that's the last thing they can do is to beg for food. Or rather, am I neglecting Christ if I pass that person by? Am I so much tied up in myself that sometimes I don't even see them there? They're just part of the scene, and we accept it and forget that people have needs, people have wants, and I have, and I should share because I can. So those are the words I think we have to remember today, as scary as I find them, maybe you too. Whatever you do to the least, you do to me.